Yu-Gi-Oh! The Invoked Archetype by TGS Anime.
The Invoked Archetype, known in the Japanese as the Invoked Beasts, are a series of cards that debuted in 2016's Booster SP Fusion Enforcers. The archetype is made up of a single effect monster who, through fusion, can be merged with any attribute of monster to take on a variety of different fusion forms.
I actually like Invoked for that reason. Invoked is very easy to play and very user-friendly. What does your basic combo look like? Do you have the Magical Meltdown? Drop the Magical Meltdown. Magical Meltdown, search, response, Ash, yes, no. No Ash, search out Aleister. Normal summon Aleister. Ash, yes, no. Okay. Normal summon, it's because it's normal summon effect. You have the response window. Cool, activate effect, search out Invocation. Invocation, response. It's very linear. Like, the plays are very short, snappy, and linear. So, one of the opening plays you can see is like, oh, we'll just go right into Mechaba. You can go into Elysium. I can't remember the one. Is it a Goides? I think is the one that requires an extra deck monster as well. That one's a pretty popular one. Or the odd Caligula, because the deck will use that to help floodgate the opponent. Like, Invoked has a lot of different lines of play. Some arguably better than others. I mean, I don't know when the last time I saw the water one was that Cocytus, right? That one's kind of a niche pick. But Invoked is really interesting.
Each of these forms are unique in terms of their level and attributes, and through their usage of their archetype-specific fusion card, Invocation, you can also banish a monster from your opponent's graveyard in order to meet the requirements.
I do think that specifically is if your opponent controls a monster summoned from the extra deck. I do think it has that restriction. I think branded fusion is far more busted.
Means is if your opponent plays a deck with no consistent theming, then your opponent's graveyard serves as a pool of potential fusion materials for some, or maybe even all of your extra deck. Fun fact, by the way, the Invocation spell is the only fusion card that is able to use opponent's cards from the graveyard. However, a version of this card did appear earlier, exclusively though in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. It was wielded by a character called Jim Crocodile Cook, the card was known as Fossil Fusion.
Well, no, he used Fossil Fusion. I guess technically, yeah, you could argue that Invocation is kind of Fossil Fusion adjacent. I did like Jim Cook. Like, Jim, it was a character. GX, I'm definitely biased towards.
Will we ever see the Fossil archetype come to the real world? I hope so. Their name of Invoked is a reference to the act of invoking. To invoke something means to call on it, be it a deity or a spirit, and this is done usually by a prayer or some kind of act. In the case of this archetype, it very much seems as if Aleister the Invoker, through the use of his staff, book, and incantations, is invoking these creatures from another world into his own. But it must be asked, at what cost does this come as? Each of the invoked monsters' individual names are also references to historical or mythological events that occurred. These references usually noted to have some sort of association with the actual attribute that the monster wields too. So now we know a little bit more about them, how about we take a look at each one to see what they can do and what inspirations they hold. Starting with the only main deck monster in the archetype,
It's really interesting seeing older TGS
Aleister
anime videos.
the Invoker. His effect is, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one fusion monster you control. It gains 1000 attack and defense until the end of this turn.
Notice the wording. The wording is not specifically an invoked fusion monster. It is one fusion monster you control. You could have Evil Hair and Malicious Bane out for all anyone cares. You can use it as a effectively like baby honest hand trap to give it 1000 attack and defense until the end phase of the turn. It's so interesting how it's worded.
If this card is normal summoned or flip face up, you can add one invocation from your deck to your hand.
It's Hooters,
Aleister is the central core of the deck. Without him, the deck could not work. And by extension, so would the existence of these invoked monsters.
No, honestly, the deck doesn't work. Take it from somebody that has played Invoked. I played Dids without Pot of Prosperity, Dogmatic, Invoke, Shadal. I actually really like the deck. Oh my god, does it get greedy though. Like, Prosperity does wonders for that build. But like, it's kind of like when I run Branded, because I run Keeper of Dragon Magic. If I drop that Keeper of Dragon Magic, I'm literally saying, that is my normal summon, you're going to Ash this, or I go off, right? Like, you drop Aleister response, Ash, cool, we're gonna go game 2. If they Ash the Aleister, you're hurting pretty bad, unless you happen to have, say, Magical Meltdown or an Invocation already in hand as well. But even like Aleister is the play. That is the crux that you have to hit. If you can negate it, you definitely stall them out of a lot of momentum.
His name of Aleister is a reference to a man by the name of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley was an Englishman from over 100 years ago who acted as a ceremonial magician. Through his experiences in life, he developed a spiritual philosophy known as Thelema. Its symbol was that of a unicursal hexagram, a symbol many of you might recognize as the seal of Orichalcos borrows from this heavily. Aleister Crowley's teachings were inscribed inside of a sacred book, known as the Book of the Law. That's right, this very same book is seen in the hands of Aleister the Invoker. It is even referred to by the same name. His philosophy of Thelema means to will, as in the story from Crowley, it tells of how he was able to invoke the Egyptian deity Horus, the king of the sky, into the real world.
Man, I hear this Horus guy from Warhammer 40k. I hear Horus is pretty legit. I hear Horus definitely didn't do anything bad.
In the context of this archetype, Aleister is invoking these spiritual beasts to the real world through the use of the Book of the Law. But for what reason he invokes these creatures, we do not know. Was it to fight against a greater evil, to study the usage of something from the unknown, or perhaps just from scientific curiosity? Regardless, Aleister's reasonings for bringing these creatures into the real world is left unknown. However, use of the Book of the Law is not something that should be done lightly.
No! You must not read from the book!
As
that movie is so underrated. The Mummy, oh my god, man. That is chef's kiss, masterpiece.
overuse of its magic tears a fragment of the user's soul in order for its use, and reckless use of its power will eventually lead the user to madness.
It's a cool concept. I like what it borrows from. It's a cool
Aleister
deck.
the Invoker of Madness, known in the Japanese as Aleister the Rampaging Invoker, requires 2 monsters with different types and different attributes. This card name becomes Aleister the Invoker while on the field or in the graveyard. If a monster is fusion summoned while you control this monster, except during the damage step, you can discard 1 card, and if you do, add 1 invocation or 1 the Book of the Law from your deck to your hand. If this face-up card you control leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can add 1 Omega Summon from your deck to your hand.
I've never used Omega Summon. Like, I've definitely used Aleister Invoker of Madness. He's kind of one of those, like, one-ofs that I've thrown in the deck. But it's never really been something that I've focused around. But then again, to be fair, my focus with Invoked has always been kind of a supplemental archetype, much in the way Shaddoll kind of is, right? Where if you're playing, you know, something with Earth attributes, you can use your Shaddoll fusion and, you know, get out like Shekinaga. The odd Grista, depending on what the metagame is, right? If you're in a very fire-heavy metagame and you're running Super Poly, you could probably get away with Grista and try to flag out your opponent a little bit, like, or Construct, right? A lot of lights, a lot of darks running around. Shaddoll, Wendigo. I almost said Wendigo. I think that's is it Wendigo in JP? I'd have to look that up. I think it is, but Winda is a very popular floodgate, one that I actually used in Dogmatic Invoke Shaddoll. So the way that I use Invoked, by extension Shaddoll, is to be supplemental of something else to be able to accentuate what strong cards there are in the archetype, right? Like having a Mechaba on board backed by an Aleister in your hand that can just make it a 3,500 on a whim, also being fodder for, hey, they're activating Ash, they're activating Called By, they're activating, I don't know, Mirror Force. Do I have the proper card type in my hand? Cool, I have an Omni Negate that's live on the field, right? Nowadays, I've kind of shifted towards Branded Despia, kind of, but to be fair, that's like Invoked 2.0. That's the meme, it's Invoked 2.0. And even Yubel, actually. I went out for Phantom Yubels. I put out for Nightmare Thrones when they were like 25 a piece, because they were like 40, dropped to like 25. Now they're back up to like 34 as of this video. Definitely came up with a W on that one. Bought those at exactly the right time. Thank you, everyone that watches me, for feeding into my habit. I like shiny cardboard. But no, like, Invoked is such an interesting supplemental archetype, and that's, I feel, its strength, is playing it in this way.
Yes, through overuse of the Book of the Law as seen in Magical Meltdown, Aleister's mind and body had been twisted into a demonic version of his former self. Now burdened with demonic horns upon his crown and a blood-red arm that pulsated with dark magic, he now only seeked to invoke, and as such, his corruption only spread more and more. We see this horror unfold in Omega Summon, as Aleister opens up over a dozen gates simultaneously. This act warps his body even further until eventually his mind and spirit breaks, fully transforming him into the being known as Invoked Caligula. Despite these horrors that occurred, there was a light in this darkness. Prior to Aleister being fully consumed by his invoking magic, he was able to steal his resolve and do one act of good. He imparted his teachings and founded the Prophecy Spellcasters, an organization that each represent one of the major arcana from a tarot card deck.
Yes, I actually really like spellbooks. Dear God, is spellbook expensive though? Like, I mean, there's ultis and stuff you can get, like ulti, some of the spellbooks, like Spellbook of Knowledge and stuff. You can get an ultimate, but like Spellbook of Power, I know has an ultimate as well. Good God, it's expensive though. That's my one deterrent from actually building it. And even then, I feel like I'm gonna enjoy Ubel a lot more because I really like fusion focused decks, whether that be Hero, Omni Hero, Ubel, Invoked, Branded. I don't know how I've forgotten that twice. I literally play the deck. It's right over there behind me. But like, there's options, man, with fusions. All I'm saying. Super Poly, I called this back in like 2010. Like, dude, Super Poly was ahead of its time and rightfully got banned in Shadal format when Shadal first came out, right? Dude, that was nutty.
Through this act, he was dubbed as Crowley the First Prophesier, aka in the Japanese, magical original text, Crowley. He required 2 spellcaster monsters. His effect was, if this card is link summoned, you can reveal 3 spellbook cards with different names from your deck, and your opponent randomly picks 1 for you to add to your hand. Also, shuffle the rest into your deck. You can only use the effect of Crowley the First Prophesier once per turn. Each turn, 1 level 5 or higher spellcaster monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing. We'll learn more about the Prophecy archetype in the future. But for now, let's take a look at each of the fusion monster Aleister invoked, starting with Invoked Caligula, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beasts Caligula.
I really like that we didn't even cover Omega Summon, what it does, because that kind of mirrors what I said. I have never used Omega Summon. I think I've ever used it as a tech one of, and I've never used it. I've never actually, I think, resolved it. So that's just really funny.
Requires Aleister the Invoker and 1 dark monster. Its effect is, if a player's monster's effect attempts to activate, none of that player's monsters can activate their effects for the rest of this turn. Well,
he's a really good floodgate, right? Like, it's used for things that activate a bunch of effects, and it stalls them out to... sorry, give me 1 second. Player... Yu-Gi-Oh! Players can't read. I'm point case me right now. I have to actually remember what it does by reading it. Monster effect attempts to activate, none of that player's monsters can activate their effects for the turn, so it limits it to 1 activation per turn, 1 monster effect activation, both players. Each player can attack with only 1 monster during each battle phase, so it's kind of like a shittier Kaiser Coliseum. Like, Caligula kind of goes hard. He's an odd one to tech in because of his low stat block. Hypothetically, you could instant fusion this guy out too. Wink, wink.
This card is face up on the field. Each player can attack with only 1 monster during each battle phase. Being Aleister's soul merged with darkness, his name of Caligula is referencing a Roman emperor from 41 AD, also named Caligula. Ironically, he was described as a noble emperor during the earlier parts of his reign. However, after some time, he began acting cruelly to his subjects, delving deeper into his own extravagance and perversion. The people of his land eventually saw him as a good man that slowly became an insane tyrant, much like Aleister's fall into invocation. It's worth noting that both this monster and Aleister share the same attributes, level, attack, defense. As well, Aleister's clothing and hair color can still be seen in the monster's artwork, further cementing their connection. Invoked Raidjin, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Raidjin, requires Aleister the Invoker and 1 wind monster. His effect is, once per turn during either player's turn, you can target 1 face-up monster on the field, change it to face-down defense position.
Do you know how you know what Raidjin does? He's just Book of Moon. Look at Book of Moon, being a spell speed 2, he is just a Book of Moon. He is actually tech because he is a Book of Moon. He is a Book of Moon with a booty. What's his stat walking in? 24? 2,400 booty on this man, Book of Moon.
Monster. His effect is once per turn, during either player's turn, you can target one face-up monster on the
attack,
field,
yeah,
change it to face-down defense position. Being a part of Aleister's soul merged with wind, his name of Raidjin reveals he is most likely based on the Japanese thunder god Raidjin, something that strangely the international name seems to allude to more than his Japanese one. We actually see more allusions to this through the monster's artwork as he wields lightning, and due to the use of the word Rai in this card's name, which translates to thunder in Japanese.
People who are perceptive will also know that the Gate Guardians, Kazejin, Suijin, and Song of the Thunder has that Rai kanji on him.
Invoked Cocytus, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Cocytus, requires Aleister the Invoker and one water monster.
I think Cocytus, because of his water typing, is one of those that I very, very ever rarely used. I do tech Cocytus, unlike the Earth one. I do tech Cocytus in. Cocytus is effectively a 2,900 booty. That's what's the name of that hero card? It's Burstinatrix and Clayman. In defense position, it can attack, and I think it does piercing. Cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effect. So it does have a protection effect. Protection from destruction by effects specifically. Cannot target this card with card effects. Cool. That's also neat as well. This card can attack while face up defense position. If it does apply its attack for damage calculation. I mean, so it does not inflict piercing, but it's still kind of just a big booty you can have. It's not awful. Like, I mean, what do you super poly this with? I guess there's the new Sea Serpent deck stuff that's going around, right? Like, what are you going to be hitting with this? Mermails? Tidal? Is Tidal back? I could see Tidal, like, if Tidal was really prominent, right? I could see that. What are you hitting, like, Barincest? I think that Cocytus' typing just kind of gets a little weird, but that's because water is an odd typing. At least in my experience, once again, having to relearn Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2024, have played this game since Structure Deck Yugi and Joey, but having to learn a lot of things because people have years of experience on me at this point. Title got brought back yet? Oh my god, Dragon Ruler's return, please.
His effect is he cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. This card can attack while in face-up defense position, and if it does, apply its attack for damage calculation.
So yeah, you use the 1800, but you can sit in the 2900.
Being a part of Aleister's soul merged with water, his name of Cocytus is a reference to the river that surrounds hell. That same river, talked about in the Divine Comedy, also flows all the way down to the depths of hell, where
Yu-Gi-Oh! Really loves the Divine Comedy. If you haven't, look up the Burning Abyss archetype. It is the funniest stuff ever.
It's frozen over.
It's
Those
super good.
who dwell there are all traitors, who, because they have done such irredeemable acts, have caused them to be frozen in place. Invoked Purgatrio, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Purgatrio.
So Purgatrio is effectively a Bujinte Susanoo that inflicts piercing. 2,300, and it also gains attack per.
Requires Aleister the Invoker and one fire monster. This card gains 200 attack for each card your opponent controls.
Card your opponent controls. That includes monsters, spell or traps, anything in the Link monster zone, right? That extra monster zone, that 6th one. If they control the card, you get plus 200.
This card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. Being a part of Aleister's soul merged with fire, Purgatorio is a reference to purgatory, the place where people believe those who have sinned will go after death, to suffer for all eternity. Invoked Magellanica, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Magellanica.
I never tech this in. I have never found a situation in which I needed it over Mechaba or wanted to go with this over Mechaba. I mean, if you're fighting under skill drain, probably. I think, what is it? What's the stupid bug deck? Ballpark. With like Goki Pole and stuff. If you're running an Invoked engine in there, I think you can get this out pretty easily. But this is I also just haven't played a lot of decks that require, or that I meet this requirement. And it also is a vanilla for all intents and purposes. So I haven't really ever found a need for that.
Requires Aleister the Invoker and 1 Earth monster.
He exists,
Fun fact,
though.
this is the only invoked monster that doesn't have an effect.
Yeah.
However, he is a part of Aleister's soul, being merged with that with Earth. His name of Magellanica is a reference to one of the alternative names of Terra Australis, a hypothetical continent which appeared on maps between the 15th and 18th centuries. Why was this land hypothetical? Well, because no one bothered to check if it was actually there. People just kind of assumed that if there was a continent all the way up here, in order to balance the Earth, there must be a continent all the way down here too.
I love looking at people throughout history because today we can look at this and go, oh, well, it didn't actually exist, or, oh, well, this is actually this thing. It's really funny to look at, like, humans throughout history going from, what is it, a Earth-centric solar system to a heliocentric, I guess it would be Terra-centric, right? Heliocentric system where we're, planets rotate around the sun. And, oh, man, dude, like, the world is just... We have a lot more understanding than we did back then. But even then, we still have things that, we've mapped what is it? A very small, minuscule percentage of the ocean. We still get things like the Magnapena squid that pop up every now and again. I love it. It's T-pose squid. Don't look it up if you have thalassophobia, dude. T-pose squid rules, though.
My guess was wrong, of course. However, there was actually 2 other continents, though nowhere near the size of what they imagined.
No.
These places were eventually named Australia and Antarctica. Invoked Mechaba, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Merkaba.
Mechaba is effectively the bread and butter of the deck, at least the deck variants that I've run. Especially when you're running it alongside a it's Dogmatica engine, because you just fuse away like the Ecclesia, the Fleur de Lis, and just crap out a Mechaba. Grats, I have an Omni Negate live as long as I have the specific card type I need in my hand. Oh, you're gonna called by? Cool, chain Mechaba? No, you're not. Cool, you're trying to activate your own Aleister the Invoker? Cool, gonna discard my Aleister the Invoker? No, you're not. Spell speed 2 negate.
Requires Aleister the Invoker and 1 light monster. His effect is once per turn when a spell or trap or monster effect is activate. Quick effect, you can send the same type of card, monster, spell, or trap from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, banish that card. Being a part of Aleister's soul merged with light, Mechaba gets his name from Merkaba, also known as the Divine Light in Hebrew. This light is alleged to be the method of transport for angels to reach those in higher realms. The word Merkaba consists of several meanings. Mer means light, Ka means spirit, and Ba means body. The fact that this card's artwork is indicative of a chariot gives the monster an essence of a vessel to transport souls.
Mechaba is also a machine type.
Invoked Elysium, known in the Japanese as Invoked Beast Elysium.
Elysium is your nuke button. I have very ever rarely resolved Elysium. It's cool to have. It's one of those that I love. I love the design of this. But the amount of times I've actually resolved Elysium, and even less so in a favorable fashion, I just cut it.
Requires 1 invoked monster and 1 monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. Must first be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. While face up on the field, this card is also dark, earth, water, fire, and wind attributed. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can target 1 invoked monster you control or in the graveyard. Banish it and all monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute as that monster. An entity
So the funny thing is that it says in the graveyard, right? So what ends up happening, if it's on the field, this card is also what you control your graveyard, banish it. I mean, if this worked to the graveyard, it'd be a lot better. But if it's face up on the field, it counts as all these other typings. During the player's turn, quick effect, you can, because it's during the player's turn, so that means it's a quick effect. You can target 1 invoke monster you control in the graveyard, banish it, and all monsters your opponent control the same attribute. If Elysium worked in the graveyard, it would be a lot better, but that would also be a really big, like, W for invoked. Probably a little too powerful, especially because you can like super poly your Aleister, or at least 1 invoked monster. So this requires not Aleister the Invoker, but an invoked fusion monster. So there's a little bit of setup to get to this, meaning you have to have, say, Invoked Mechaba or Invoked Cocytus or Caligula, right? And then you got a super poly, or not even super poly, you have to fuse it with another monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, which from my understanding, if you special summon a pendulum monster that was face up on the extra deck, that still technically counts, but you have to have investment to make this card. And so it's the fact that it doesn't count as the dark, earth, water, fire, and wind in the graveyard And that's the problem that this runs into. It could be a lot better if it did, but you start venturing on that. Is that overpowered?
Graveyard.
Territory?
Banish it and all monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute as that monster. An entity invoked into the world for the use of Aleister's soul being merged with the elements of light, dark, earth, water, fire, and wind. This monster is the strongest invoked in terms of level, attack, and defense. It even gets its name from Elysium, the alleged place of paradise where heroes are sent after their death. Entrance to this garden can only be achieved by living a righteous life. In fact, the monster's artwork depicts itself spiraling up above the earth, intertwined around a small land within a glass biodome. This appears to be a clear reference to the Elysium Garden, and a place that only those worthy enough to enter are able.
Oh, we're going to cover Omega Summon in this, probably.
Invocation, known in the Japanese as magic art of invocation. Fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand as fusion materials. If summoning an invoked fusion monster this way, you can also banish monsters from your field and or either player's graveyard as fusion material. If this card is in your graveyard, it can target one of your banished Aleister the Invoker, shuffle this card into the deck, and if you do, add that card to your hand. You can only use this effect of invocation once per turn.
So what happens is you shotgun the invocation. The invocation sends your Aleister or whatever else to the graveyard. Sorry, banish the monster. So your Aleister goes to banish, whatever else goes to banish. You activate the invocation in your graveyard, target the banished Aleister, add the banished Aleister to your hand, invocation shuffles back into the deck. It does a lot, but it once you know what it does, it actually is very predictable in what it does.
Magical Meltdown, known in the Japanese as Reckless Magic Square. When this card is activated, you can add one Aleister the Invoker from your deck to your hand. The activation of your cards and effects that include an effect that fusion summons a fusion monster cannot be negated. Also, your opponent's cards and effects cannot activate when a monster is fusion summoned this way. You can activate one Magical Meltdown per turn.
That actually has given rise to people that will say having Magical Meltdown technically makes your fusion summon spell speed 4. Which is incorrect. Like, I understand because it's like, well, what about Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment, that kind of thing? Well, when the summon goes through, right? So if we try to break down this effect, right? How the activation of your cards and effects that include an effect that fusion summons a fusion monster cannot be negated. Hypothetically, you could activate Invocation, Branded Fusion, Polymerization, right? Any of these cards, they can't be negated. Your opponent's cards and effects cannot activate when a monster is fusion summoned this way. So, on summon, activate? No. So I get that they're trying to say like it's above spell speed 3 in certain instances. But I don't really agree with that sentiment. That's something that the greater Yu-Gi tubing and Yu-Gi-Oh community kind of gets to have that discussion about. So when you hear spell speed 4, there's technically no spell speed 4. There's spell speed 1, which is kind of on your turn, right? Activating Magical Meltdown is a spell speed 1. Spell speed 2 is trap cards and or quick play spells, right? Or it says quick effect. That is spell speed 2. You can use it on your turn or your opponent's turn, depending on what you're doing. Spell speed 3 is counter traps. You cannot chain an MST, Mystical Space Typhoon, which is spell speed 2. You cannot chain that to a Solemn Judgment, which is spell speed 3. It is a counter trap. So just like understanding how that works, and thus we get into spell speed 4, because if we can avoid spell speed 3, then spell speed 4. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's put it that way.
Down per turn. The Book of the Law, known in the Japanese as Holy Book of Law. Tribute one invoked monster, special summon one invoked monster from your extra deck with a different original attribute from that monster. This special summon is treated as a fusion summon. You can only activate one The Book of the Law per turn.
It's cool to have. I have only ever, I think, resolved it a couple of times. And even then, it is a tech 1 or 2 of. And if something better is going to come in, like something better is going to come along, that's one of the first things you cut, right? It's kind of like, I use this to fill space. This can definitely extend my plays in the right ways. But if something better comes along, it's going out. It gets cut from the deck list. It's interesting to have.
Omega Summon, known in the Japanese as magical name, 2 Mega Therion. Target any number of your banished invoked monsters with different names, special summon them in defense position. And with that, guys, that is another archetype done. Let me know what you thought of the Invoked archetype, and by extension, what do you think about their connection to the Prophecy archetype? Would you like to see them done next? Let me know in the comment section below, but before we go, it's time to give a massive shout out to the people that help support the channel. Thank you first and foremost to my platinum backers. Support me on Patreon, You Know You Do 97 and J24092. Guys, thank you very much. As well to my YouTube and gold Patreon backers, Silver Defender, David Shanahan, Goosey Q, Matthew Braithwaite, Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything. Oh, thank you very much, Dylan. Chungming Zen, James Forge, and You Know You Do. Guys, thank you over here, and I appreciate all you guys. Guys, catch you all later. I hope you enjoyed.
Saw edit. Watching old TGS anime is actually really cool. Like, I like going back in time because this was before the fossil archetype actually dropped. So this is interesting to go back and watch. But I saw that a lot of people liked my reaction to the Yubel archetype, which I will have you know, since I watched that, I have ended up building Yubel. I'm still waiting on a couple pieces, namely my 3 Phantom Yubels that I have inbound. Yes, I paid MSRP for those. God damn it, it's like, what, 66 a copy right now? It's insane, but card actually extends some plays. I really have been waiting for Yubel to be competitive for years at this point. Yubel, Terra Incarnate was kind of the big one, but it's always ever been Rogue. And as someone that likes fusions as well, right, and can use Super Poly, it's kind of right up my alley. So thank you, TGS Anime, for reigniting my passion for Yu-Gi-Oh! My wallet definitely isn't in the best situation, but I'm having a blast. And honestly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very approachable game. I know that's going to be seen like a hot take, maybe an L take by a lot of people. There's a lot of terms that get thrown around, spell speed 4, Omni Negate, you know, things like that. But if you go into this and you go, first of all, just kind of like, what's your price point, right? Do you want to play meta? Do you not want to play meta, right? Hey, there's a Ice Barrier video, or, oh, well, Invoked was a cool video, but I kind of like the Tarot and Prophecy, right? You know, hey, there's cool things you can watch. And I like watching TGS Anime because he does this archetype breakdown, and he does it so well and just brings a lot of this to, you know, to the table front and center. Like, oh, yeah, no, I remember the Book of the Law. I don't ever use it, but it's a thing that exists within the archetype that you can look at. So I like what they do. Point in case. It's very interesting, and it's been very helpful, especially trying to relearn Yu-Gi-Oh! And relearn some effects. And also showcase that Yu-Gi-Oh! Players can't read, hence point in case I have to actually read. Thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate you coming out. And definitely check out TGS Anime if you haven't. And I'll see you in the next time. Hopefully I have my Yubel deck at that point in time.